Welcome. It's Friday, uh, January 6th, and here in Nova Scotia, where I'm at, the day we had a bit of freezing rain and freezing drizzle overnight, but not too bad out now. But it was a little slick this morning when we got up. Um, Hope you're having a good day wherever you're at. And we're just going to get into our devotional here and look at Proverbs chapter 3, verse 24 today. That's where we're at. And so God bless you as you join. The verse says, "When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet." This is a great little sentiment, isn't it? Yeah, that's such a great idea to be able to go to sleep and not be afraid, to have sweet sleep. Who doesn't want that? That sounds so good. This, of course, is in the context. So, to understand the verse today, I want to once again just remind us of the context, which is that a few verses ago, made the statement that God created everything from wisdom, and that with knowledge and understanding, He was created the world. Not just that He created it from those places, but that He created it with those things, so that it's actually in the world. In other words, the world is a logical place. It's a reasonable place. It's an orderly place. It's not chaotic and unpredictable and crazy. God, from His nature, is wise, and He created a world in which His wisdom works. And so the verses that followed those verses, the ones we've been reading this week, they all come from that, and they basically have this idea of, yeah, so pursue God's wisdom, keep them. If you pursue God's ways, then naturally in the world He made, you will have a better life. And so many of the rhythms of life will be good for you. And so we've been identifying these rhythms. So we talked about attention and so where our focus is. We talked about our identity and our understanding of self. We talked about the confidence we can have in life. And so today we get to this idea of sleep. It's not just about sleep. There's more to it than that. But we get to this idea of, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have sweet sleep? But the key word in this verse is, or the key phrase in this verse is when you lie down. The lie down statement is a reference to, well, it helps us. I'll get to that in one of our questions, but it helps us understand the verse better. But there's an idea here of the rhythm of peace, of how in our life, when we learn God's ways, we can find peace. So that lying down is a thing you can do without being afraid, and that you can actually enjoy those times when you lie down. So anyway, we'll get to that. That's the idea of the verse. Let's go to our 4 questions today. So question 1, how do you make a rhythm of peace? Wouldn't we all love to have that? So how do you do it? So that's an obvious first question. Let's do it. And to kind of introduce that idea, or the answer to that, let me just ask you this. What is it that keeps you up at night? When you think about those sleepless nights you have, what is it why do we have a sleepless night? Sometimes, to use the one that kind of often you get here, how do you sleep at night? The idea of guilt, right? The idea that, oh man, you've done something in your life that's terrible, and so how can you sleep at night when you know that this thing has happened? So guilt can be one of those things that causes us to have a not very sweet sleep at all, but rather a restless sleep. So that's one thing. So obviously, learning a rhythm of peace, learning God's ways of life, will keep us from guilt, and that won't disturb our sleep. We can lie down, have sweet sleep. Another thing, though, is fear. So this verse talks about you can lie down and not be afraid. And for a lot of people, what keeps them up at night is the worry of things, worry about how I'm going to pay the bills, worry about where are my kids, worry about what's the future going to be, what's going to happen when I wake up tomorrow, and the fears and anxieties of the next day or the next week can cost us sleep. And for a lot of people, if you happen to wake up in the middle of the night, you can be like an hour or 2 hours trying to get back to sleep because your mind just keeps going and going and going, and that's terrible. And once again, learning the rhythms of peace, learning God's ways, can lead us into a lifestyle or life rhythm of peace, where we can learn to cast our fears on God. We can learn that by following His ways, we can be free of that fear. So we'll come back to that. And then the third one I'll just mention here is caffeine. And I know that sounds funny, but caffeine can keep you up at night, can cost you your sleep. and can cause your body to race, your heart to race. It can cause anxiety attacks in the middle of the night. And I know this for a fact because it happened to me. I had a terrible panic attack one night that lasted for days. The spark that caused it was an overdose of caffeine. So why am I saying that? What does that have to do with a spiritual talk? Because everything is spiritual. Everything is everything. And God's wisdom teaches us how to live in a physical world too. And believe it or not, even things like how we should eat, God talks to us about that and how we should approach things like diet and exercise and sleep patterns and all those. I mean, that's in the scriptures, this idea of how to live within the world the way God made it, rather than, as I did in my case, overindulging in the caffeine. And yes, it cost me a lot of sleepless nights. So it's all relevant. And this is the thing about making a rhythm of peace in your life, is learning how to live in the world God created in the way that God intended for you to live in the world that he created. Our society is teaching you to try and recreate the world in your own image. It just doesn't work. And you'll lose a lot of sleep. You won't have the peace. So those habits of living are things like, I don't lie, I won't steal, I'm not going to murder, I won't insult people, I won't act dishonorably in life. And those things, not as defined by me or my neighbor, but those things as defined by God, right? And I find out, what does God mean when he says I shouldn't be dishonest? Or what does God mean when he means I should be respectful or whatever? And I'm going to live that way. I'm going to make a habit of living that way. And well, what do you know? Peace tends to follow that. So that's the idea. Question 2. What about others that are trying to hurt you? How can you be at ease when you know that they're out there? So, in the dark of the night when you're trying to sleep and there's someone out there who hates you and they're trying to bring harm to you and stuff. Oh, how do you find peace? Or even when you wake up the next day, and how do you find ease in a life with enemies? And that's a real thing. And if you read the book of Psalms, you'll see how many times the psalmists talked to God and called to God about my adversaries, my enemies, and deal with my enemies for me. But that's kind of part of the puzzle. The ways of God aren't just simply ways for an individual hermit in the woods. They're ways for us to interact with each other. And so with the wisdom of God, we can learn how to interact with people better in noble ways that actually create harmony rather than adversarial situations. It can help us learn how to make peace with our enemies, how to treat people with love and respect so they're less likely to want to retaliate. And one of the scriptures in the New Testament says that the blessed are the peacemakers, because they'll be called the sons of God. And that process of learning God's ways to be a peacemaker actually helps diffuse the enemies of our life. Now, there are people who are hard set to be your enemy. They have malice in their hearts, and that's a thing too. And so in those cases, once you lie down in the evening, you can go, you know what? As far as it depends on me, I have been at peace with everyone I can possibly be at peace with. So there's nothing more I can do. So now I'm just going to leave it with God and let him deal with my adversaries. Let him deal with the person that's coming against me. And if he allows them to hurt me, then he knows better than I do. So I'll trust him in that. And you can take the fear out of those things. Not always easy to do, but it is how it works. And you can get to that point of being able to be at peace even when your adversary refuses it. So there's that. So question 3, why am I equating sleep with peace in this text? So the text says, when you lie down, you won't be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. And I'm saying a lot about peace. That's kind of the idea here. So that those two words, lie down, it's talking about going to bed, but it's also kind of an old metaphor, and you'll find it in different places in the Bible. Metaphor, or an old figure of speech that refers to when I stop striving, when I lie down. So if you think about what lying down is, yes, it is literally lying down to go to sleep, but it's also when you say, I'm done with my day. I'm no longer going to put effort out. I am now going to be at peace, right? I'm going to stop striving. I'm going to be at peace. But the danger in that is when you stop striving, it doesn't mean everything else in the world has stopped. So when you lie down, well, what if, I'm not sure I locked the door. So you get up from bed and you go downstairs and you lock the door, make sure it's locked. And oh yeah, so you strive a little more. And then you go back to bed, you lie down. Oh, I think I might have left the light on downstairs and my power bill is going to go up and see it. Right. And so you continue striving. But when when you lie down, it's like when you come to those points in your life every night, or even in other parts of your life where you come to those points where you can't help it, you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to stop striving, because at the very least you need to sleep. And so your fears will come. If I sleep, the world keeps going. But if you've lived the way God taught you, then you can let it be. You can let that go, or you can realize that I'm going to be vulnerable, but God doesn't stop. He is still there. So when you've done everything that he's told you to, you can leave the rest with God. And you can go, whatever happens, God's in charge. And while I sleep, he doesn't. And I know I've walked in his ways, so I've been walking with him. So he's here with me. And I can lie down now. I can stop. I can rest and be vulnerable. And I know I've done everything that I can do. So I'll leave the rest with God. So that's the idea. That's why it's peace, why I'm talking about peace. So question 4, our final question today. What if you can't get free of your fear? What if you're really, really trying and you're like, yeah, I want God's peace. I don't want to be afraid. You've been really trying to get rid of the fear and not deal with the fear and so on and so forth. The way I'm phrasing that question is a little bit of a hint to the answer. What if I'm trying really hard but can't stop having fear? Now, I'm just pausing here to let you think about that for a minute. What if I'm trying really hard but can't conquer my fear? It's not very intuitive, but one of the ways we conquer fear is by stopping the striving against it. Now, this could be misunderstood, so I hope I say it well today. There's no script, so I'm just shooting from the cup here, but being able to cast your fear on God. So in the New Testament, St. Peter writes in his letter to cast all our cares, all our fears, all our anxieties, to cast them onto God, because he takes care of us. And so believing that God really takes care of us and throwing our fears on him means not keeping them, right? Not striving, even the fear itself, not striving to overcome the fear, rather just saying, God, I have it. I'm afraid, and giving it to him, right? So a really good habit is when you go to bed at night is to just come to the Lord and spend a few minutes in prayer and just say to God, here's what I'm afraid of. Here are the things I'm afraid of. God, this and that, I'm afraid of this and I'm afraid of that. And so God, can I just leave that with you while I go to sleep? And just leave it with him. Now, I know, easier said than done. I'm trying, no. It's one of those things, until you actually kind of experience it, you can't totally understand it. I can't even find myself totally explaining it, but there's a point where you really do just let go, and then the peace floods in and takes its place. So part of the reason why we don't get there is because we strive so hard. We don't really fully trust God yet, right? No offense meant, but we don't fully trust him with it. So I can't cast it on it because I don't know that he cares for me, but he does care for you. And so cast your care on him and let him have it. Don't give up. If you're struggling with it, so are all of us. I do still. From time to time, I'll find myself struggling with anxiety and say, God, I'm sorry that I don't trust you enough. And even that, God loves us anyways. And he's like, okay, but if I would just cast my care. So don't despair. Remember, you're developing a rhythm of life. You're learning the ways of God. It takes quite a while for us to learn them. So keep trying to learn God's ways and learn to cast that fear to him, and know that if you've done it all the way God has taught us, then you've done everything you can anyway. So just know I've done good. I've lived the way God wants me to. So now it's up to him, and let him have it. Remember, the rhythms we've been talking about in these last few verses is a rhythm of attention to God. Right? So back 3 verses ago, a rhythm of paying attention to God, focusing on God, his ways, a rhythm of identity, understanding myself, from God, getting an identity from God, a rhythm of confidence in God, so learning to have trust and confidence in Him, and then a rhythm of peace through God. And as we learn these things, those are the rhythms. That's the lifestyle. That's the worldview of someone who follows God, and it really pays off. Yeah. So for you today, let go of your distress. Die to yourself and find life. Let God's ways rule your life and leave it with Him. Starting next Tuesday, we are going to go to verse 25, and the next number of verses are all about broken rhythms, when we fall into broken rhythms, and so we need to avoid those, and so we'll talk about those next week. In the meantime, God, help us to develop these good rhythms, help us to trust You, and to have that peace. I pray. God bless you, and we'll see you on Tuesday.